Episode 58, March the 9th to March the 10th, 1915. Terrier's First Blood in Sodden Fields, by William Linton Andrews. Read by Roger Morledge. The author of this narrative was on the staff of the Dundee Advertiser at the outbreak of war. He joined the 4th Territorial Battalion of the Black Watch. Magnificently does he describe the sensations of himself and his civilian chums when going with the Bareilly Brigade of the Meerut Division into the holocaust of Neuve Chapelle, their first taste of battle. Mr. Linton Andrews continued his journalistic career after the war and became editor of the Leeds Mercury. We felt honoured to think we had been chosen to serve in battle. Some of those who did not go to France till much later may think I am writing just the conventional journalistic phrase of the period, but no. We were eager to fight, to prove ourselves comrades and helpers to the old contemptibles, of whom we had heard so glorious a record, and our regular friends of the Indian Army. We were smarting to avenge the things said to us, and to show that even a man with hairs on his chin might have no spot on his military record. We were eager to live up to the reputation of our famous regiment. Later, before going into a charge, we generally shook hands and promised each other that the survivors would send messages to the bereaved. But nothing so mournful was in our mood then. We were excited and eager to do that for which we had joined the army, our sworn duty. Moreover, there was the thrilling anticipation of being in at the great final victory of the war. Vain hope. Vain, ridiculous hope, as we see it now. In those days we thought we had but to break through the German front and the enemy, short of men, would crumple up. This was not the mere ignorant opinion of a raw territorial private. It was the professed hope of the army commander, General Sir Douglas Haig, who, in a special order dated March the 9th, said, "To the First Army, we are about to engage the enemy under very favourable conditions. Until now, in the present campaign, the British Army has, by its pluck and determination, gained victories against an enemy greatly superior in men and guns. Reinforcements have made us stronger than the enemy in our front. Our guns are now more numerous than the enemy's are, and are also larger than any hitherto used by any army in the field. Our flying corps has driven the enemy from the air. We are now about to attack with about 48 battalions, a locality in that front which is held by some 3 German battalions. It seems probable, also, that for the first day of the operations, the Germans will not have more than 4 battalions available for the counter-attack. Quickness of movement is therefore of first importance to enable us to forestall the enemy and thereby gain success without severe loss. At no time in the war has there been a more favourable moment for us, and I feel confident of success. The extent of that success must depend on the rapidity and determination with which we advance. To ensure success, each one of us must play his part and fight like men for the honour of old England." We studied the message. "3 cheers," said Nick. "We've done with trenches." "Yes, if we break through and get them on the run and don't let them stop," I said sagely. We thought we saw it clearly. It was all so simple. We were to make a surprise attack with a battering ram of men and guns, and once we had thrust it through the trench system, the foe would be rolled up. Yes, rolled up. It was a favourite phrase then. Later battles were more mysterious, and the private rarely knew what was happening except in his own bit of battlefield. He and a chum might get stuck in a reeking pit for a whole day and night and not know whether friend or foe was in the smashed trench 50 yards away. But we had a good idea at Neuve Chapelle of what we were after. For one thing, the field of battle was tiny. My recollections may be wrong, but I think we expected to make a gap of only 2 miles or so. We had a very fair idea of the ground to be covered. We territorials, eager for our first battle, studied it as much as we could. Neuve Chapelle, which gave the battle its name, was a little village with a church and a brewery. It was close to the main road that ran from Esther, which was in our hands, to crossroads made by the Rue de Bois, where lay a dugout position we called Port Arthur, then across to the German front line, and so on to La Bassée, which was occupied by the Germans. Neuve Chapelle had changed hands several times in the autumn and was held by the Germans from the beginning of November throughout the winter, making an awkward dent in our front line. Behind Neuve Chapelle, as we faced the enemy, lay a little wood, the Bois de Billet. The ground slowly rose towards the village of Aubert, and about 9 miles beyond was the great city of Lille. Our object was to straighten out the salient, get to the high ground, especially at Aubert Ridge, and there command the approaches to the important manufacturing towns of Lille, Roubaix, and Tourcoing. We were hopeful enough to believe that on the night of the battle there would be cosy billets for us in Lille. But even raw territorials could see our task was none too easy. Our trenches were only for temporary shelter. We never meant to settle in them. The enemy had made fortifications of his, with places in which to sleep in comfort. Moreover, a battered village like Neuve Chapelle could be made extremely strong with sandbag protections. We had seen that already at Richebourg, where we laughed at the shells falling around our billets. Then we should have to fight our way across fields so sodden with winter rains that they were like morasses. Before the battle, we had to throw bridges across drains and watercourses in order to enable a concentration of troops to be made quickly. Communication breastworks were made, for communication trenches would quickly have filled with water. We dragged our way up with ammunition, bombs, rations, sandbags, barbed wire, spare bridges, planks, hurdles and pickets, and stored them at depots in the field. Knowing the time it took to do this on our side of the line, what were we to expect when we crossed to the German fields with no multiplication of bridges to help us over the watery parts, and all our fighting material to be carried forward? As the day for the battle approached, we looked skyward with the utmost anxiety. It would be impossible to conceal our preparations from the German airmen. Fortunately for us, our own airmen were then extremely powerful. They challenged the German planes, and it was obvious even to a simple private that we had command of the air in that section for the time being. The battle plans, of course, were not revealed to humble people like myself, then a lance corporal. Men of this rank, just one above that of private, were not in the confidence of majors, let alone major generals. But it was clear to me from the lie of the land, from the assembly of ammunition and engineering material, and from the hope of getting to Lille, that we were in for a tremendous, shattering struggle. True, before we had Haig's message, one of the writer fighters of our little group said it would only be a small biff, never mentioned in the papers. He said such attacks were constantly being made, and nothing was said about them. Joe, Lee, Nick, and I all held the big battle theory. We were convinced this was the battle that might end the war. Not that we had much time for conversation in those days. We had become sweating coolies. We were carrying all through the hours of darkness, every night. And we came to loathe the sodden tracks with wire overhead, wire underfoot, every few yards. We had always to carry our rifles and ammunition with us, not because there was any danger of our being suddenly attacked, but because this is the military way. We should have been more useful without them, but no, that was against the military code. So, the day came, and still the enemy, as far as we could see, was blind to our battle preparations. We might be raw, but we were keen, intelligent men, all volunteers. The wasters and the criminals had been kicked out of the battalion or deserted in Scotland. We meant to do our best for the honour of the Black Watch, the pride of Dundee. We felt that loving eyes at home were upon us. Bewilderments were to come, but not yet the bleak misery, the all but suicidal desolations of the Somme and Passchendaele. It was the night of March the 9th, 1915. Snow swept down upon us in the flooded trenches near Neuve Chapelle. We grew colder and colder. I never thought I could be so chilled and still live. It was a biting torture for the body. We could hardly drag our feet along when orders came to move from the trench to the Port Arthur dugouts, there to snatch a few hours' sleep before we began battle. At 5 a.m, my platoon comrades and I were routed out to move to a reserve trench. We shambled over ground hardened with frost. It was colder than ever. We called it a trench, but it was nothing like the fortified cuttings that became familiar later. It was more of a breastwork, a stockade strengthened with sandbags of earth. Joe Lee, Nicholson, and I were together, sitting close to each other, backs to the stockade. Dawn came, and we peered across at the German lines, wondering if Jerry knew that we were coming. At 7 a.m, a German flew out of a low-lying cloud, swooped over Port Arthur, and after coming down to 300 or 400 feet, whence he must have been able to see our crowded lines, he raced back. Now we were for it. German guns began, but directed their fire against the Port Arthur trenches which we had left. Except for our usual morning hate, with registering guns at dawn, the British artillery held its fire until 7:30 a.m. Then began, after a single shot that appeared to be a signal, the hell fury of bombardment from 480 guns and howitzers. The noise almost split our numbed wits. As the shells went over our heads, we grew more and more excited. We could not hear each other. The shots from the 18-pounders were screaming not far over our heads, and much higher up, higher than the highest mountains of Europe, high explosives from the 15-inch howitzers were rushing like express trains. After a while, we could trace the different sounds. There was no difficulty in making out the German trenches. They'd become long clouds of smoke and dust, flashing continuously with shell bursts and with enormous masses of trench material and bodies sailing high above the smoke cloud. The purely physical effect on us was one of extreme exhilaration. We could have laughed and cried with excitement. We thought that bombardment was winning the war before our eyes. Incredible that the men in the German front line could have escaped. We felt sure that we were going to pour through the gap. Looking towards the village of Neuve Chapelle, we saw the houses terribly battered, but not crumbled away as we expected. We thought the German artillery must have been swept out of existence. Vain hope. Counterfire opened upon us. "They're shelling our fellas," Nicholson exclaimed in extreme surprise. They were indeed. We looked along the breastwork and saw about 300 yards away shrapnel plumping along our black watch Terriers. Stretcher bearers ran along the line. Shell after shell came over, each about 10 yards nearer Nicholson and myself. But a few minutes and our turn would come. We had no thought of escape. We had to lie and wait while the punctual shells worked along the line. "This looks like the end," said Nick. On my right lay a young architect, Douglas Bruce, who had crept up to us for warmth. "Oh," he said, "if we're for it, we're for it." It was the nearest that we had yet been to death, and we were surprised at our calm. We had then seen little killing at close quarters. Death was ruling a straight line along our trench. Crash, crash, crash. Our turn was coming. Now the line was veering slightly beyond our trench. The shells were falling 5 yards behind the breastwork, 6 yards, 7 yards, 8 yards. "The next one's ours," said Nick. "Good luck, Linton." We shook hands. We wormed as low as we could. The shell came screaming. It burst 10 yards away with a great gnashing roar. Earth drenched us. There was a cry of astonishment and pain at my side, while yet the upthrown earth was falling. "Damn them," said Douglas Bruce very heartily. His mouth was bleeding. He'd had a whack on the jaw and a tooth had been knocked out. He took it calmly. "Stretcher bearers," we cried, and a man crept up and did what he could. The shrapnel passed along the line, growing more and more harmless as it fell further and further behind the trench. Then it stopped. All was quiet, and a lark sang. Bruce started to walk with bloody jaw on the first stage of a journey that was to take him back to Scotland. An order came along. "4th Black Watch, move to the left in single file." It was 11 a.m. The village of Neuve Chapelle had been taken with a bayonet, and we were ordered to move forward to the captured German trenches. We passed many Indian dead and stinking shell pits on the way. There was a point at which we had to jump a ditch. As we jumped, we were in full view of the Germans. They were a longish way off, but now and then they hit a man as he jumped. Our company commander, Captain Boers, on the other side of the ditch, called on us to hurry. We were bunching slightly as men hesitated to jump. I remember 4 in front of me. The first ran as fast as he could and jumped high. Crack! He was wounded slightly but carried on. Then a little stumpy fellow, as he jumped, was shot dead, his knees sagging as he fell. The next man, oldish and heavy, just flopped into the ditch itself and then scrambled out unhurt. Then Nicholson rushed it safely. Now for it. I took a good run, aimed to jump high, tucked my legs under me, then thrust them forward for the landing, just as though I were jumping for Peel B House at my old school, Christ's Hospital. Bullets whistled past, but all was well. Curious that jump stands out so clearly in my memory. I cannot think what happened next, except that there seemed to be more and more fire and the situation was more and more confused, and the stench of the shell pits stung the nostrils. I remember seeing one of our men flop before a heavy shell burst. He rose, covered with earth, and made towards me, white with passion, his eyes rolling. "This is madness," he cried. "The world's gone mad. Why don't you stop it?" "I wish I could," I said. "It's murder," he went on. "Why don't the papers stop it?" I spoke soothingly, but he said the same things over and over again and went off raging. I remembered being stationed with my section, probably after some hours, to guard a pump at a brewery. As we moved to it, we passed a notice board, still standing, with the word "Danger." Nicholson laughed, as if it were the greatest joke of the war. By this time I was too tired to laugh. I was stupid with fatigue, cold, and strain.
Till to death I go.